Good evening. Welcome to The Pipeline. This is the Western Standard's weekly panel show where we'll pick a few top burning issues and analyze them, dissect them, break them down, and try to make the sense of them. Oh, a lot of issues these days aren't terribly sensible. So thank you all for tuning in. My name is Cory Morgan. I'm a columnist with the Western Standard, and I'm joined by two other members of the Western Standard. I'll go from end to end. I'll neglect Nigel and start with our news editor, Dave Naylor. Thanks for coming in. It's been a while since you've been on the pipeline.
It is. Good to be here. I'm kind of sad you neglected Nigel.
Well, Nigel gets a crack at this every week, and this is our opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford.
All right, I get used to it.
Oh, yes. Well, you get that final word, though, throughout the introductions and who we may be.
No married man ever gets the last word.
No, that's true. I know better than that as well. I like learning things the hard way, though.
3 times, isn't it?
Something like that. This isn't a marriage advice show. This is news and issues. And I think our advice is of more value with that anyways than our perhaps other. We'll do a special another time on that. And we got lots to talk about today. Guess we'll get right into it. We'll talk about Trudeau. Our Prime Minister has gone to India and represented Canada yet again at a G20 summit, Dave.
Yeah, and just when he couldn't embarrass us anymore, he finds new ways to do it. You remember his last trip to India, Cory? It was just a debacle. He played Mr. Dress Up, pretended he was a native Indian, and I think even the Indians were embarrassed for him. But he sort of didn't learn his lesson this time. He wasn't invited to key meetings. He and the Indian Prime Minister don't get along. They don't like each other. That was plain to see. Trudeau asked for a private meeting with the Indian Prime Minister. Didn't get one. The only thing he was asked what Canada had contributed to the final communique. He said gender, language. Just blather. And then just when you think it couldn't get any worse, his plane broke down. And he was stuck in India, so they sent a rescue plane to get him, and that turned around just as it got over Europe because they fixed the plane. So the rescue plane was diverted, and he finally got back to Canada late Tuesday night. So another foreign trip, Nigel, that he won't look back fondly on. Even though he did take his son. Can't take the estranged wife, so did take the son out of school and had him parade around in fancy dress too.
This would be the young man who's one of the kids who wasn't going to be made a spectacle of?
Yes, the one that he pleaded for privacy for, correct.
Okay. Well, one of the tragic things about this is that Harper left the state of relationships between India and Canada in tremendously good condition. First of all, he and Modi liked each other. They're both economists, so they would sit there and tell each other economist jokes.
Sounds thrilling.
Yeah, if all the economists in the world were laid end to end, they still wouldn't reach a conclusion. Oh, that's, what a good, tell me another one. But it's the fact of the matter is that one of the signature accomplishment was to set up a deal for Canada, and more specifically for Saskatchewan, to supply uranium for the atomic energy program in India. And that's what is now on the table in talks that our government, our federal government, our Liberal government, the government of Mr. Trudeau, has just broken off. You can imagine how they feel in Saskatchewan. You can imagine how they feel in India, but you can imagine how they feel in Saskatchewan. They have just been undermined by their own federal government. It's kind of how we feel in Alberta when we have an environment minister who wants to shut down our key industry. So there's that whole aspect to it. But the way in which Mr. Trudeau goes there and seeks to moralize, you mentioned the LGBT stuff. But it goes much deeper than that. He has chosen to have opinions about Indian protest movements. And if you want to know how that feels to the Indian government, just imagine Prime Minister Narendra Modi saying, well, you know, it seems to me those convoy guys had a point. They would go nuts in Ottawa if any other foreign leader said that about what is, when all is said and done, an internal matter of dispute. Doesn't matter what you think about the convoy, whether you're for it or against it, to have somebody else from another country weigh in on it would be most unwelcome. And you could see why, therefore, when Mr. Trudeau was saying kind words about people who were farmers, I believe they were, a couple of years ago, who were rioting and blockading in India. Well, you know, right to protest, peaceful protest, this sort of thing. Didn't go over well. And I can't imagine that he'll ever go back to India as anything other than a tourist.
Well, I couldn't imagine it being a top destination for him as a tourist. He doesn't have a lot of fond memories, I think, of his visits. I mean, we need dignity on the world stage again. You know, diplomacy. You don't, as you said, have to agree with every action of the government, the leader you're speaking with. But when you're at an event like that, you set aside some of those things and focus on your common grounds and see if you can make some progress. But he's incapable of diplomacy.
Yeah, there was a great photo by the Canadian Press of Joe Biden wagging his finger right in Trudeau's face, which none of the mainstream media in Canada ran. But it just shows you what Trudeau's thought of on the international stage. It's just one embarrassment after the other, and you know, the quicker he retires into Tofino, the better we can get start building Canada up again in the world, because he's let the military is now a laughing stock. His relations with India and other, Germany, hey, we'd like some of your natural gas. Well, there's no business plan here. So, yeah, well, it was a mess, and just utter embarrassment.
So I guess the question is, will he fight the next election, whenever that is?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it?
I mean, there's a part of me that says, oh, yeah, please, because this is not a strong candidate.
No. And they're sort of running out of time if he does resign to get a new one in with, 6 months to a leadership debate. And then the new leader, he'll be like Danielle Smith, not having a lot of time before the next election.
But beyond, just dealing directly with Modi, which is still frustrating. I mean, India is one of the biggest economies in the world. It's growing. They're coming along. It's not just uranium, lentils and cereal crops. There's things that prairie producers really were looking forward to supplying to India. But there was the G20. There were a whole number of other leaders of other countries there. I mean, a leader could take advantage of that time to have other dialogues or, things such as that. But I didn't see any indication of him doing anything over there.
No, there was a lot of pictures of sort of where Canada should be seated, and he wasn't there.
Yeah, I think he actually skipped a couple of meetings right at the start.
Yeah. But I have to ask you, as Stephen Harper's speechwriter, you've been on this plane.
I have.
That that had to be rescued, had to be fixed. What's it like? Is it luxurious and Air Force One miniature type?
No,
style?
not at all. It is what it looks like, which is an old airliner. The seats in it are 100% economy class from about row 6 back. And there is a partition for the Prime Minister's use. If you can picture what a 1960s Windstream trailer would look like on the inside with that fake wood, that's how they have this thing tricked out. They got it from Ward Air, or at least it came from Ward Air via CP Air after Ward Air went out of business. And on one of my first trips, the young lady coming down the aisle with the candies and the Cokes and all the rest of the thing, a little black tray in front of her, and it actually said in yellow, Ward Air. This is on the Prime Minister's plane, years after it had left Ward Air. Tell you a little story about the press and why it is so difficult to get this plane changed, and why it is difficult to make repairs to things like 24 Sussex Drive. We were on a long flight. I went back there one day to chat with people in the press corps, and fellow was complaining that it was uncomfortable back there. I won't identify him, but he knows who he is. And he said, "Oh, man, I'm just really, really uncomfortable back here." And I said, "Yeah, I kind of sympathize with you. But what would you, like, if we actually announced that we were going to go out and buy a new plane, a comfortable new plane, what would you do?" And he said, "Well, we criticize you, obviously. We pan you for wasting the public money." Well, I guess we're both going to have to get used to economy class for a bit longer then, because he's absolutely right. And at least he was honest enough to say it. You can't do anything without having the press turn on you as if you are a waster of money. You know, one of the ironic things is that sometimes it needs to be a socialist government, the government of the people, to actually get anything like that done. I remember they refurbished the legislature in Victoria. It was the NDP that did it. If the Socrates had done it, it would have been a foul play. And with 24 Sussex Drive, it's the same thing. You never get that place fixed up, even if you wanted to. And the will seems to be disappearing because it would just be criticized as a waste of money for the benefit of the pleasure of the incumbent prime minister.
The ultimate insult for Trudeau was, Trudeau and Modi hate each other. And when the Trudeau's plane couldn't start, Modi took great glee and sang, "Justin, why don't you take my plane home? You can borrow my plane.
I'll give you a lift.
I can, take the official Indian jet." So I'm sure you got a chuckle out of that.
That's it. And the state of that plane, as Nigel saying, I mean, it's been multiple governments that, for political reasons, just haven't kept up with those things. But it just adds so much insult to injury on what was already a bad trip. I mean, Trudeau isn't directly responsible for the state of that plane, but he's certainly wearing it today. I mean, it's just embarrassing when you're trying to play a world player. How many countries don't even have a backup plane if their leader got into such a circumstance that they couldn't get them out within 8-12 hours? It took 2 days.
I mean, there are some countries that don't even have an official jet. Great Britain does not have an official prime ministerial plane. On the other hand, they've got their pick of British Airways anytime they need it. So maybe that's the way to go.
Well, and as you said, too, I mean, a conservative government will do it. But in the United States, they've had some pretty conservative governments. They still maintain the White House, at least, and they'll maintain Air Force One. But perhaps some of the difference, too, is their head of state is the president. Ours, technically, is the governor general. And, boy, we aren't shy on pouring money into her budget and housing and flights and catering.
No, I mean, Buckingham Palace in London needed repairs. The repairs were done. It cost a whole bunch of money. The anti-monarchists were probably upset, but it's something that the government realized needed to be done because it's Buckingham Palace. Surely, as whoever the prime minister is, surely he should be able to live in comfort and greet world leaders in his house for dinner, and he should be able to fly to these places accompanied by his staff and the media. And right now, Canada again lagging behind the world.
Well, we'll see. It seems we often wait until things become interminable before we fix them. I guess there are new planes coming down the line.
Apparently, they've bought 5 new planes, so we'll see. The military has to get trained up on them and whatnot. So hopefully they've got rid of all the Ward Air trolleys.
I think most people wouldn't begrudge the prime minister having, no matter whether they like the prime minister or not, a safe, secure means of getting to destinations. And likewise with accommodations. We don't expect them to stay at the Super 8, but they could probably do better than $6,000 a night.
Yeah. Cory, I think you do many Canadians more than justice when they say they don't wish him any harm. But on behalf of all the staffers who travel with the prime minister or whatever party, let me just say, yes, let's have a safe airplane and one that's going to get you home.
I want them out through the electoral process or resigning, not through a tragedy with an airplane.
Not with a parachute.
No. Okay. You wouldn't figure out how to open it. Okay. Let's talk quickly about our sponsors, part of why we can stay independent as a news outlet and have all these great stories coming out from our plethora of opinion writers that Nigel manages and news sources all over that Dave manages. And that's because you guys subscribe. So this is when I was going to talk about sponsor. The subscription's important too, though. So subscribe. It's $9.99 a month, guys. $100 for a year. It's a great deal. Used to pay for newspaper subscriptions without thinking twice. Well, this is the way to keep us operating, keep these shows going, and keep those stories coming and get past that paywall. So get on there to westernstandard.news/membership and take out a subscription. If you've already subscribed, thank you very much. We really, really do appreciate it. Also, we do have sponsors, guys, and I didn't want to neglect them, but we've had a great one for a long time. If you're a Pipeline viewer, you know them. It's the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. They've been a fantastic sponsor for the Western Standard, and they're a fantastic organization. If you own firearms, you want to own firearms, you need a resource on how to safely use all of that stuff. That's what this association is about. Those resources are there. And more importantly, of course, we have an ideologically driven government that wants to take away your right to have those firearms, to own them, to transfer them. You need to stand up for yourself, and the CSSA does that on your behalf. So get on there, take out a membership with them as well, guys. It's very important. It's investing in your own freedom. Their website, cssa-cila.org, or again, just search them out, Canadian Shooting Sports Association. All right, well, let's talk about the next burning issue. We've got trans activists, trans issues, trans everything, Dave. What if they finally cross the line?
You know, if they haven't tipped the scale, it's got to be coming pretty close. You know, you're seeing Muslim parents protest across the country against pronoun use and gender stuff in the school, and this week's been sort of headed off with a Toronto Star column, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Nigel, the headline said parents have no right to know the gender of their child.
Right there.
Oh, there it is.
Privilege,
It's a privilege, not a right to know your kid's gender identity. I mean, come on. I know the government wants to get involved and have as much control as you can, but there's been a government backlash to this stuff. It started in New Brunswick. Now it's spread to Ontario, has said parents have to be involved. Saskatchewan has said parents have to be involved. Manitoba has said it. I think Alberta, when they have their UCP caucus meeting, will undoubtedly say it. But yeah, I think the balance is finally turning.
Yeah, it is. Kids have always gone through a difficult stage in early adolescence, some more so than others. But, we've been dealing with this for generations, and generally speaking, between parents and pastors and school counselors, sometimes a family physician, they get them through it. And they develop along perfectly expected lines. The boys become men, the girls become women, and all the sadness of those early years becomes a memory. It isn't an indicator of things to come. If somebody feels a bit unsure of themselves when they're 12, it doesn't mean that they were born in the wrong body. Unfortunately, there are now people who evidently wish it were so. I find it strange that it is so widespread, because we never had this problem 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But now, in some communities, everybody knows somebody whose kid is transitioning. There are other communities, by the way, with different sets of moral standards and different sets of expectations, where nobody knows anybody like this. So maybe there's a cultural thing that's part of this. But although I am glad that in New Brunswick and in Ontario, and I believe in Saskatchewan, the governments are pushing back against this, they're not pushing back very hard. All they're saying is, if it's going on, the parents have a right to know. Well, good. Yes, they do, and they should. Why are we not putting a stop to this, what would I call it, this proselytization, like, I'll pick a different word, one I can say after lunch, they actually go out and push this message. Are you sure you're a little boy? How are you feeling today? Little girl? No. You need to come down to the office and talk to a counselor. And the first thing, before you know anything that's happened, they whip the kids off to a counselor and then to somebody who can actually help them.
Yeah. What I don't get is these doctors who say, well, they're having gender problems when they're 2 years old or 3 years old, or even younger than that. Some doctors have said you can tell in the womb. Well, no offense, but come on, right? I mean, if you played with a Barbie when you were a kid one day, that doesn't mean you're having gender problems, right? And you're right. I remember my kids 20 years ago, they didn't have these problems. And certainly nobody in their schools that we were aware of had any of these problems. But you're right, it's becoming pushed and pushed and pushed into kids by the media a lot and by activists a lot that, maybe I do want to be a girl. And I think it's changing.
I think the story here is that parents will put up with a lot. But when they actually feel they don't even know what's going on with their own child, wait a minute, and they push back. And the politicians are listening. They may not be doing all that Nigel Hannaford thinks that the politicians should be doing, but they're doing something. And I would say that this is this could well be something that the Conservatives pick up on and will do them nothing but good. Pierre Poilievre is very public that he is pro-choice, but I don't think that Pierre Poilievre is in favor of somebody coming to his kids in school and saying, I'm tempted to say, are you sure you're not a liberal? But,
he's got a young daughter that age.
Yeah.
I think she's 5.
Are you sure you're not a little boy? He would go ape over that. And people would vote for him on that basis alone. Just saying no to nonsense.
It's some of it. I mean, to note, I looked into, this story. It's by columnist Julie Malbogat. I'm probably destroying the pronunciation of the name. I identify as an English speaker, though. And coincidentally, her son was born a girl, but she transitioned or announced at 8 that she's trans. Now she's 11, and they're indulging her and dressing her as a boy and calling her a him. And it's just, you know what? That's your choice as a parent to indulge that, I guess, and whatever. But what you're talking about is taking away the parent's ability to take part in whatever's happening with the child. That's where a line is being crossed, whether you're left or right. Don't always assume your school. What if your child goes to a Catholic school and you're a progressive and you don't like what the school is teaching the child as far as the faith goes? Well, according to this person, you shouldn't have that right to know that. It's the school's right to raise your child, not yours. That's a big line being crossed with these activists.
Yeah. And you have to look at these activists that they were responsible for the entire cancel culture. Right? They were a powerful group and still are. When you get the mob, the baying Twitter mobs, as I call them, against something, it's very difficult to turn that around. But I think people have now had enough. They really had enough. And I think the activists have hopefully met their match in some of the school boards, some of the education ministers, some of the premiers, which are now being involved. And I think you're right, Nigel. I mean, it's a common sense way to win an election. Imagine Trudeau or whoever the opposition is to Poilievre saying, well, no, I don't agree with you. I don't think parents should have the right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's political suicide.
Well,
right
apparently he said something like that in India, and that probably didn't help how things went there either. But it's don't mess with my kids.
No.
Well, and it kind of surprised in a sense. I mean, they're always watching a convention closely to see if something way out there will come out. The media is watching, the activists are watching, the liberals are watching, and the convention debated and said we are going to oppose medical intervention on children before they're 18 on these trans issues. And some of the usual suspects came out howling about that, but it was more muted than I would have thought. It wasn't the gotcha moment. And I think even the progressives are realizing that the line's been crossed. I mean, there are some progressive nations that have that sort of policy. Norway, Denmark, I believe, a few of those others, they're pretty progressive, but they said, no, we aren't cutting parts off and we aren't medicating these children until they're 18. That's it. We can indulge a lot of things, but we're not doing anything irreversible until they're adults. And I think most people see it as a reasonable
Common sense,
position.
just common sense.
But will they be given credit for that? I think the Liberals don't realize that it's not a wedge issue yet. They're still trying to make it work.
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem with the Liberals is that they genuinely don't understand that this is highly offensive to people. I mean, this is actually undermining truth. You know, we've got this way because we live in a postmodernist age where whatever you think is true for you. It's good enough. Well, people are starting to say, no, actually, there are boys and there are girls. They're not the same thing. They're not interchangeable. And that's true. That's going to be hard for the progressives because people, that's deep-seated value. This lady that you talk about here, well, I find it a surprising point of view for her to take. But at the same time, as you said, she's actually, even though she's trying to make an argument against parental rights, she's just demonstrated by what she's doing with that child that as a parent she can do it.
Well, yeah, and you know, trans people exist. There were men trying to be women 100 years ago.
Yeah.
You can find some, you know, you never know what Oscar Wilde might have even been into, but they've been around, but they've been a tiny minority of individuals. And if they're adults and they want to live that way, I'm happy to indulge as much as possible. But they ask us to set aside reality. And I don't think most trans people do. I think it's the activists. I mean, when they're saying that a man can suddenly say, I'm a woman and enter a weightlifting contest, you're asking us to set aside physiological reality. They pushed it well outside into the absurd. And
Yeah, well, men now rule women's sports.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it's become.
You know, that's one of the features of the cultural revolution we're looking for is that whatever is the latest victim group gets to assert its moment in the sun and the last one gets cast aside. What price feminism now? You know, trans rules, you want to assert your rights as a woman? You know, move over. We've got a man who's can lift a heavier weight than you, swim faster, run faster.
We've won the battle of the sexes.
We have won the battle of the sexes.
took it back. And I mean, I don't know. It's just how far do we go with indulgence? You know, a person identifies as such, fine. But I mean, a person identifies as Napoleon. We don't give them a couple divisions and say, go to Europe. You can only go so far. I mean, we want to be accommodating. But I think the line crossed is children, though. Leave the kids alone.
Yeah, you know, actually, you offered that as a throwaway line, Cory, but that's a good point to take home. If somebody identified as, well, you said Napoleon, all right, somebody identifies as Napoleon, you know where that's going. That's for counseling, and ultimately, if they can't shake them of it, polite confinement, where they can't do any harm.
The loony bin, is that what you're trying to say?
Dave, don't be so crass.
That's
Napoleon, he can invade France or invade England from the loony bin.
Yeah, I took it down the wrong line because I mean, a person who's identifying as a different gender is certainly not conventional in thinking, but I think it can be indulged without causing any harm, and they can live a life as such. I wouldn't call it as bad a mental illness, perhaps, as thinking you're a long dead French general. But
well, I don't know which is less harmful, really. I mean, at least the guy who's the long dead general can parade around in uniform and order people around, but nobody's listening. And he's not changing society.
no,
You know, it's his thing.
his authority is still pretty limited in reality.
Yeah.
Who knows? Well, I can't go further with this one.
No,
Right.
it's time to change the subject.
Sure, let's get on to it. Housing, of course, and that's a huge one right now. Affordability, everybody's feeling it. I think we're all feeling it when we look at our kids, grandkids, or whatever, wondering how on earth are they making ends meet, or even people more age if they don't haven't locked into a good mortgage already and they're renting. It's getting bad. And Ottawa's making it worse, as usual, it seems. Dave, we've got some green codes, do we?
Yeah, no shocker there from Ottawa. The Fraser Institute did a big study on what the new Liberal plans for greening your house and reducing emissions from your house. We're not talking about you after a chili fest. Emissions from your house, green emissions. And the Fraser Institute says in British Columbia, those rules will add an extra $85,000 to the price of a new home. $85,000. This, I mean, keep in mind the average price in Vancouver is already over $1 million, and now it's going to be another 85,000. In Alberta, it's going to add $35,000 to the price of a home. Premier Smith was quick to jump on that yesterday and sent out a tweet saying, "Look, this is, another kick in the groin to Alberta, and we're not going to put up with it," and all that kind of stuff. But it's, a carbon tax, now green energy houses. They're pricing Canadians out of livability is what they're doing. Just think of trying to save $85,000 as a down payment. It takes years, and now they're adding years onto people being able to save up this extra $85,000. It's crazy.
So that $85,000 is one big expense. The other big expense is the cost of the paperwork that goes into getting a permit to even begin to build a house, and then as you're building it, to complete it. It has been calculated that $1 million house that you're speaking of in Vancouver, $300,000 of that is in everything except wood and gyprock and concrete, and it's all the what they used to call the soft costs when they were
the gatekeepers now.
The
As
gatekeepers.
Pierre
Whether you're a liberal or a conservative, you want a house to live in, and so you should be listening to somebody who's got a sense of why things cost what they cost. To then add this other green charge on the top, you end up with a $600,000 house for which you're going to pay $1 million, and then you got to buy the lot, and then of course who knows what that can cost you in Vancouver or Calgary or Toronto. It invites the question, Dave, and I'm going to ask you: do you think that it's actually a plan, an intention to make things more expensive and to impoverish people, or is this just a bureaucracy that is out of control, led by people who don't understand?
I think you've got a bureaucracy led by Stephen Guilbeault, who is a radical activist, and he's happy to do all these things because that achieves his green utopia. And I don't think Trudeau's smart enough to realize the damage he's doing.
Or alternatively, he is all for it.
Exactly, he's all for it.
I mean, Cory here has written and spoken several times about the plan to drive us off the roads. Drive us off the roads, make our houses unaffordable. What exactly is the vision of society that this conjures up?
Well, I mean, my thoughts are for some it's just, bureaucrats being bureaucrats. They support bloat, they support delays. It's just their nature. But some, I think there is an ugly ideology underneath. I think Guilbeault is one of those. They see humanity as a negative thing. They see it as a bad thing that needs to be sidelined, reduced, and it's also backdoor communism. If we can the solution always when it becomes untenable, well, the state has to step in then. The state will have to build the housing. The state will build those brilliant Soviet-style long row apartments that I got to see back at the end of the 80s when I toured over there. Yeah, you don't freeze to death. You didn't starve to death over there, but boy, you sure weren't living. But they realize that people won't vote directly for that sort of policy, but you can really incrementally put people into that corner, and you make it more and more unaffordable. The state keeps assuming that role. And, you bring in more things. Wealth taxes, that was the latest too. We're going to hit the rich and save the poor, but it never works.
Just wait till they tax your capital gains, your how much money you've made on the house, which is the retirement plan for most Canadians, and the government takes 30% out of that. Wow.
So is that mooted?
That's, the CMHC always talks about it. They're always preparing reports. So
at their last cabinet retreat, I talked about that before, the Liberals brought an activist. He was the one who keeps writing those reports, calling for an equity tax on primary residences as their guest speaker to talk to them. Well, if you really aren't going down that road, as they keep denying it every time it's brought up, then why do you keep studying it and listening to the people who are promoting it?
They tried that 40 years ago, and of course it went nowhere, thank heavens. But the idea was that if you owned your house outright, then you had an advantage against somebody who didn't. And the fact that you'd earned it and paid for it and done everything right to put yourself there wasn't considered. The idea was that if your house commanded a certain rental value, if it would rent for $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, well, that's like having extra income, isn't it? So you should be taxed on that. Imputed income. That was the phrase. It didn't go anywhere, but these people are out there.
It's the politics of envy. That the same activist made the statements in his report. Even he didn't even sugarcoat the ideology behind it. So people fell into windfall wealth with their home ownership as it gained value while they watched TV and drank beer. That's what he said in it. Like they don't recognize that a person had to scrimp and save for years to get that down payment, that they had to maintain the house, that they had to put off a lot of other purchases. You know, these activists that do this are usually the ones that, oh yeah, I took a 3-year tour backpacking Europe before I came back to Canada to start working on my student loans that I feel is unfair that I have to pay back now. Other people put their nose to the grindstone and bought a house, and now you're saying they shouldn't have the equity within it. It's offensive. But it's the way they think. But I mean, another aspect that makes it tough, I got to admit, those of us who did buy the houses, who are building equity within them, there's not as much incentive on the part of those voters to see house prices drop.
No, if you're in the market, you're laughing.
Yeah.
If you're not in the market, you're crying.
I mean, to be fair, I'm not saying the market should be crushed, but it does make it a little more politically difficult. You don't want to sell to people, by the way, we're going to reduce at least the speed of the appreciation of your asset.
But we're getting so much immigration and refugees and whatnot. If we don't have places to house them, it's going to be chaos in cities across the country. 100. How many immigrants coming this year?
Well, 500,000.
500,000.
I don't know whether anybody really knows, because there are people who come in via the airport, hand in their paperwork. There's also folks who come in as students and then just kind of regularize their status here, which is fine, except that what numbers are being counted when the government defends its immigration record. I think we had a story this morning, did we not, that we need 3 million houses by 2035, was that right?
It sounds like a right figure.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to just repeat campaign propaganda, but I guess Oliver wouldn't have said it if it couldn't be justified, that we actually built less houses last year than we did in 1975, which is insane if we're going to have population growth of that. I don't want to minimize the effect of gatekeepers and all the things that we've just been talking about. That drives up house prices as well. But if you then just create a demand that pushes the prices up even further, the only possible outcome is utter chaos and a demand, as you said, for the government to do something. And what will the government do? Is it going to be ATCO camps?
Well, I mean, we can do two things. We can reduce the demand. That's what the government has within its control with immigration. But they won't even whisper or mention that.
Mm-hmm.
Or build more supply. But as we've seen, that was what you're speaking of was from a CMHC memo. It went to Trudeau a year ago, and he didn't act on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was saying we are coming up short by a couple 100,000 units a year on what we feel we'll need within the next 7 years. So it's cumulatively going to get worse.
Well, Cory, is it going to be the same people who criticize you if you drive an SUV and may even let your tires down overnight, who are going to say, well, if you're living in a house and you don't have somebody staying in your basement, you're a selfish pig? Is that going to be guilt-tripping people who...
I absolutely expect that social pressure to start coming on. Just the same people who say excess profits, those two words, when they stick them together, just grate on my nerves, because then it starts building that presumption that you aren't entitled to what you might have earned with a business. You aren't entitled to that spare room once your kid moved out of it.
Yeah, no. One of the things that most people, whenever I hear that phrase about excess profits or pay fair share of taxes.
Fair share, yes.
Yeah, I always remember that people earning over, I think it's over... the top 1% of Canadian taxpayers, highest incomes, pay something like 40% of the entire tax burden that everybody pays. And if you drop that down from the top 1% down to the top 10%, it's something like 90% of all taxes paid are by the top earning. So how much more of a fair share could there even be? Never mind, should there be? How much could there be? 40% of people, by the time you 40% of taxpayers, by the time you balance out the taxes they pay and the benefits they receive from government, are even, Stephen. 40%.
It's the fair share is never enough for some of the ideologues. So we will wrap up though with pivoting to another of the entitled, and she really is. Jann Arden is resurfaced. I mean, she's kind of a yesterday's person, but she's still lurking out there and making noise. I guess trying to become relevant. Maybe she accomplished it. We're talking about her.
She was insensitive, so to speak. Sorry about that. And she's not a nobody. She was a Stampede Parade Marshal a couple of years ago, so got her own TV show and whatnot. But holy cow, she lost her mind when Pierre Poilievre, flying home to Calgary from Quebec City on the weekend, had the audacity to take the PA system and make a short 45-second speech announcement. He was kind of funny, saying, rough weather for the next 2 years, but then we'll get through it. And she lost her mind, said she's going to boycott WestJet and never fly with them again. Good luck with Air Canada, Jen. The Twitter reaction was swift and severe. She wasn't even on the flight and she was complaining, and people took her to task, quite rightly, I think. We haven't heard anything that she's going to apologize, nor I don't think will she.
I don't think she will, and she just wants attention, so she got it. Darn it, we played into her hand, Dave. How do we do this to ourselves?
She really is humorless. She blocked me on Twitter a couple of years
ago.
I know it's a long list of people who have, but I mean, in this case, I was trying to play a bit of humor and a musical reference. I'll just give that story. She'd put out a tweet, just throwing it out there. There was some sort of event in Las Vegas, and she posted a link and said, "Come on, girls, who wants a girls' weekend out? Everybody join me. We can fly down for this event." And she'd not long before that been shooting at Alberta's oil sands, of course, which is popular among people who benefit from Alberta's money. So I said along the lines, well, you can't do that. It wouldn't be environmentally friendly. It's inappropriate. You and your friends need to get on your bikes and ride, which was a nice reference to a Queen song about fat-bottomed girls. And I thought she would have seen the humor in it, and it got me an insta-block out of the whole affair. But
the song was even blocked on the Queen's new best hits albums. They didn't put that one on there because of the woke aspect.
I don't get that. We're not supposed to weight shame. Fair enough. We should be more considerate of people. Fine. But I mean, that was a song celebrating the beauty of women with a few extra pounds on them. How is it now inappropriate? We can't seem to win.
Otherwise, maybe everybody just needs to lighten up.
That would be really a nice change, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't that be an idea?
What would we have to talk about then?
Oh, we find something.
I suppose we would.
I mean, we can
the
find
ones who
things,
wouldn't lighten up. That's what we're talking about.
Find things to get wound up about, though, without losing our sense of humor or a bit of a. I mean, with Arden, though, I mean, there was a point made. Makachuk wrote about it, and I think Slobodian might have touched it too. But when these celebrities go after a business for having dared allow somebody on that, again, the privilege. Speaking of this, a term they like throwing at us all the time. Well, there's a lot of working people that rely on those companies. There's a lot of people that you're saying that you want to put out of work. You want to reduce the amount of revenue to that company. I mean, they really, I don't think that many people are really going to care and reschedule their flights just because Jann Arden won't go on it. But the principle of that is actually kind of odious.
She's a Calgary songwriter. She's Calgary lives in just outside Calgary, made a career. A lot of what's happened in Calgary. As I said, she's been a Grand Parade Marshal at the Calgary Stampede. And then to go and attack a Calgary-based airline, just struggling still to get back up after the COVID thing, it was just silly. Jan, stick to trying to save horses being shipped off to Asia. Good on you for that. But give it up on WestJet.
Yeah. It's of all things to make a fuss about, frankly.
Why?
I mean, first world problems.
And as was pointed out, it was just thin-skinned. I mean, hey, you're a celebrity. You take part in politics. You can say, look, it's Poilievre being shallow and playing to his crowd on a plane. What a clown. Case closed. Move on. but call for a boycott. It's just
There were some great things on Twitter yesterday of liberals making announcements.
yes.
They had the algebra or whatever his name is on the when he was transportation minister, making an announcement on a via train, and apparently I haven't seen it, but apparently there's footage out there of Trudeau on a plane doing the same thing. But,
Well, good on Westjet. They didn't apologize.
no, but apparently they are looking at their rules again to see if they should be changed.
Well,
let's hope they stand strong.
Let's hope they stand strong.
Oh, yeah. The only question would be if passengers complain. If they complain, okay, well, you paid for a flight, you didn't want that, but I didn't hear about any passengers.
No.
If I ever find myself on a WestJet flight and I find myself seated beside Jann Arden, I will not tweet about it.
No.
I will just take it as this is life.
We have a word that
I
was
will be big.
we have a word that was invented the last couple of years to describe people like Jann Arden. Karens.
Yes.
Karens. Why, that's Linda Slobodian's article.
Linda Slobodian's line. Please, everybody go and read it.
It's kind of sad. I'll close off just with that one note. When all the baby names are coming out and everything, Karen's a very popular name. The mother of my first son was named Karen. Not a single child was named Karen the other year in Alberta. Like that name has social media and trends have actually completely destroyed what used to be a popular name. It might take another generation before we see new Karens on the block. But Jann will keep the roll on for it, I guess.
On the other hand, among your admiring fans, there are new Corys being born every year.
Oh, that's of course. Popular 70s name, but it's still some around.
Still hangs out.
All right. Well, we'll close it on that positive note. And thank you all for tuning in, guys. Even those of you named Karen or Jan, we do appreciate all of you. And be sure to check in with us again next week. We'll be doing this all over again. So thank you, Nigel and Dave.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah,
It's just
good
great.
fun.
And thank you, Jan, for giving us something to go on about. We'll see you next week.
The current Lethbridge feed grain prices are as follows. Cash barley is holding at $3.40. Feed wheat is unchanged at $3.58, while corn slipped $3 to $3.55. In the milling wheat markets, December Minneapolis futures inched up 2.5 cents at $7.81 per bushel, with local hard red spring bid for September movement at $9.25 per bushel delivered. Over to the oil seeds, nearby canola futures are off $1.90 at $750.40 per ton, with delivered values for September movement at $16.67 per bushel. And in the pulse markets, red lentils are trading at 35 cents a pound. Yellow peas remain at $11 per bushel. Looking at the cattle markets, October live cattle dropped 77.5 cents at $183.37 per hundredweight. For more information on picked up and on-farm options, give me a call at 403-394-1711. I'm Vera Buziak at Marketplace Commodities. Accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year.